in a sense, we find in our experience that most of the time the data sort of hides the vital information and reveals something which is very prosaic and ordinary. So, in the present dispensation, while the eCourts committee, to my mind, took a huge step in building the case information system, which as an architecture is good and gives an overall view of this state of health of the judiciary. It doesn't, as has been pointed out in the opening by Mr. Damle, give us a granular image of what exactly is happening in the judiciary. So I take the point that this can only sort of improve, and therefore data can become useful to the judiciary and other stakeholders such as academics, researchers, litigants, only if the studies carried out by various organizations such as Daksh and others are looked at closely by the judiciary with the help of in-house experts. The anomalies pointed out by Daksh in its report reveal actually that, and that's my opinion, that while everyone has data to share, they don't know how to share the data because the data fields are constricted in a sense. Just a short while ago, when I was talking before our session started with Mr. Damle and Mr. Surya, there is a huge disparity in the data collection by various courts. For example, if we speak about the high courts, and I'm not talking about the district courts and the courts below them, the presidency courts, the three presidency courts, who've been there for more than a century, have had historically data collection done under fields, although physically and not through the net and etc. I mean, it's not on the system, which is quite different from the newer high courts, which were created after independence. So when the high courts were asked to, sort of share the data on the CIS system, a lot of high courts, and one example of that is the Delhi High Court, which otherwise had a head start in becoming e-compliant, found it difficult to share its data on the CIS system because we had fields which were not there on the system provided by the eCommittee. So the point really is, how do we go forward? Should we sort of get down to an exercise by ensuring that we have standardized data fields, or should we sort of go with whatever the high courts have, and then from the data that they have, there is a second layer built of standardizing the data for use by various stakeholders, which would include, as I said, the litigants, the government, the academia, etc. The other point that I think needs to be noticed is that, and something that we need to look at is, why is it that there are these errors in data uploading? The errors that Mr. Damle pointed out in the opening, and those that are there in Daksh pointed out in the report prepared by Daksh. My experience shows that the errors are because in most high courts and the district, especially the district courts, uh, the data uploading is done practically by people, either judges who are doubling as someone who's uploading his data and also writing his judgments, or by people who really don't understand what they're uploading. So that could be one problem. The other is there is no clarity. As Mr. Damle pointed out that in Karnataka they didn't get, if I heard him right, one single case of specific performance. That to any law student would seem surprising for the reason that that's an action that is uh, filed day in and day out by civil lawyers. So instead of you know looking at a special field uh, vis-a-vis a particular statute, that somehow got replicated, say under the heading, cases under the CPC. So someone needs to sit down, sift the fields, or as I indicated, have more granular fields so that people are able to share the information, uh, uh, you know, uh, logically, and something that is easily understood and digested by stakeholders. Therefore, do we need a body which oversees uploading of data and corrects the errors? According to me, uh, body may not be the correct way forward, but at least every court should have some kind of a committee or a set of people who somehow look at the data that's being uploaded and make the necessary corrections so that we don't have these kind of errors. The more acute problem, which Mr. Damle pointed out, and I think that is something that ought to have been cured by Chief Justices of various High Court, is the delay or not uploading of judgments. In my view, there is no reason why a judge, after having rendered a judgment, should not upload it. Because if someone needs to make use of it, which he's entitled to, because it's a public document in that sense, unless court says it is only for the litigants with the special cases where the court may not like to upload the judgment because of privacy issues. There should be actually no lag between the time the judgment is pronounced and it is uploaded. I can understand, sometimes longer judgment is, and I'd like to go over it once more and, check, cross the T's and dot the I's and syntax, etc. So a delay of about, 24 hours, 48 hours, or maybe 3 days. But thereafter, the judgment should be there for everyone to see it. Here, I must point out, so final judgments, there is no reason why they should be uploaded. But if you ask about daily orders, there is a difficulty there. I'll tell you a difficulty in the sense of the practices followed in various high courts. I started by telling you that the practices followed in the Delhi High Court as against the presidency. Delhi High Court I'm giving as an example as against, say, the presidency courts appears to be quite different, and therefore you will find there are no daily orders. Why do I say that? Because and I'm speaking from experience. I have done a short stint in the Madras High Court. Now there is no concept of actual dates in most of these presidency courts, which includes the Madras High Court. Now, if you don't have, generally, what used to happen is if a matter was adjourned or a short hearing took place wherein nothing substantive happened, the judges actually traditionally don't dictate orders. They simply put the matter, say for a period of time, say 2 weeks, 1 week, 4 weeks, whatever the judge or the bench does, and a docket order is made out, which is what the court master does. And therefore, there is no fixed date, and therefore there is no order. Now, when I went to the Madras High Court, I had the experience of, or at least I used to do in my High Court, which is a practice which all judges in the Delhi High Court, I believe, follow, is even an order of adjournment is dictated, signed, and uploaded. In addition to that, the Delhi High Court and other high courts which follow this practice have a fixed date concept. Now, therefore, you will find Delhi orders, the daily orders being uploaded, and therefore a litigant who gets onto the website gets to know at least briefly what has happened on that date. Now, this was a practice that I took to the Madras High Court, and I asked my court staff to upload it. Believe you me, to begin with, it was a little bit of a tiresome exercise, because they had to then type out, even as order of adjournment. And typically, in my case, I would also briefly indicate what happened on that date, so that it was more for my benefit, which of course would have benefited the litigant as well. Because when I took up the matter on the next date, I knew exactly where I had stopped. So the history of the case was recorded in the order. And as you progress further, you get to know what has been happening and why something has been happening and not been happening. Now, this again is a practice that the Chief Justices of the High Court have to introduce. But when I say this, you have to take into account one important factor. Can every High Court have a actual date? It seems difficult in larger High Courts for a simple reason that their pendency is so large. If they have an actual date, the cause list for the day will be unmanageable. The flip side is, when you don't have actual dates, the litigants have no clue as to when the matter is going to come up, and some of them just don't emerge. Some of the bigger high courts like Allahabad High Court, and maybe this is true of the presidency high courts also, unless the lawyer brings it up again, by moving an application, the matters just get, figuratively speaking, buried, because everyone loses track of it. So the more important aspect is a discussion on, should we have daily orders? Should we have actual dates? Because if you have these two facets put in, you will get history of the case. So what you need to do is these small corrective measures, if they are taken, this will help and go a long way in improving the system. I mean, there are others, as you discussed. You would get perhaps other ideas as well, but this is what is something that you would immediately recommend. Why do we need data, or what do we need data for? It is obviously needed for various other things, but I have been saying at various forums that insofar as the judiciary is concerned, we need to use this data by introducing more fields for the purposes of evaluation of our officers. This is something that I told Surya when we interacted for the vision document which the eCommittee of the Supreme Court is preparing, because a lot of officers at the district court levels in high courts all over the country, my senses are not happy with the way the evaluation is going, because the evaluation injects uh, a certain amount of bias. Bias could be favorable to the officer, a officer, or against him. We need to use the data to reduce the element of bias for or against the officers by having an evaluation process which picks up certain aspects of the judge's career which appear before the evaluator in the form of cold statistics. How many matters has he disposed of? How many witnesses has he examined? What is the age of the matters that he is disposed of? How do you compare his disposal with other officers who sat on the same roster and the grading that they got? Why do I say this last bit? Is because all jurisdictions are not comparable. Say, for example, if a judge is sitting in a jurisdiction where he deals with NI cases, the Negotiable Instruments Act cases involving dishonor of checks, his disposal cannot be compared with, say, a judge who's dealing with corruption matters or CBI cases where witnesses run into 100, 150 at times, and even 2 cases in a month would be perhaps a good number for him. So this data, if we could use to inject some kind of objectivity in evaluation, that would, according to me, cure the system. Why? And why do I say that? Because if the district court is not enthused or they're not happy with the evaluation, it is my belief this is directly proportional to their efficiency. Because the people should know it's a pyramidal system as to why they were excluded from the next level, or why someone else was included. The other important point which needs to be emphasized is the data needs to be used, and therefore fields need to be developed as to what is the impact of legislations. For example, we've had when you introduce a legislation, even the policymakers at that point in time may not be wholly aware of the impact of the legislation. Can we develop fields and therefore collect data to know what is the impact of the legislation? Is there consistency in interpreting a particular legislation? These are aspects that if the metadata could reveal, it would go a long way in helping the judiciary and other stakeholders in evaluating the state of health of the institution. So these are my opening, these are my broad points. We could go on and on. I would hand over charge of the proceedings back to Mr. Damle for going ahead from here on. Yes, Mr. Damle.
Thank you, sir. Sets the stage nicely for a lot of the discussion. So we have a lot of interesting participants today from very, very different fields. Some who have worked in public policy, some who are practicing lawyers. Do I have any volunteers on who wants to pitch in first, or should I call on people one by one? What is the group preference here? Surya, do you want to kick us off on what your thoughts are?
Yeah, sure, Devendra. So thank you, Justice Shakdher, for that overview of the entire life cycle of data, right up till evaluation of judicial officers. To my mind, there are three ways in which this can be approached. One is improving the design of the technology that is used to capture data itself, which has the CIS3 hopefully will correct a lot of this judicial quality, data quality. But I mean, and there are other fields to be added. So it's not, it's not an end state. It's an ever evolving phase. The technology designed for the capture of the judicial data. So that is one angle which has seen progress from what we have seen last 5 years to CIS3, where there are drop downs to case types, but fields can be improved. That is one aspect of it. The other is the institutional aspect of it. So who is checking the data, right? Who is checking who is entering the data, how are they trained? So if there is a case file that lands up at the filing counter, who is actually who's telling them that these are the fields that you should capture? Because in our first-hand experience, the people who entered the data really need to have a lot of hand-holding and experience while handling this this process of entering in data. So the institutional aspect of it is critical to improve the data. The third is the demand side, and I think that's possibly, in my mind, a very significant game changer. When you are constantly using this data for many things, for your day-to-day administrations, like for listing of cases or evaluating what happened in the last 1 week or last 1 month, or if you have introduced one small change in your court practices and want to see, how did that go over the last month? So the demand side for data, if that is made robust, if that is made constantly saying, okay, give me that data, give me this data, if the internally within the judiciary there is a lot of demand for analysis of such data, that will automatically translate into improvement in practices. So clearly it will throw up and say, okay, this particular listing of cases, why has it not happened over so many months? Many examples like this we could go on. So strengthening the demand side really could change the way data is prioritized in the judiciary, and really the potential is vast for people within the judiciary and outside. The three aspects, technological, institutional governance, and the demand side of it is what I wanted to make, and I'll hand it over to the others and any further thoughts.
Thanks, Surya. Is there anyone else who wants to go next? Otherwise, we have a couple of interesting questions in chat, which Justice Shakdher could take a shot at. You'll need to unmute yourself, or just tell me in chat and I can unmute you. Pratik, do you want to explain your question a little bit on what you said about data entry operators?
Yeah, so during the discussion, it appeared that there's concern that people who are going to feed in the data, they need to be trained, and there's this entire discussion about possibly a kind of bureaucracy whose job is to enter data into an Excel sheet. But I mean, I'm not an expert in this field, but I was just generally wondering, wouldn't it be better to minimize human intervention? And wouldn't it automatically happen if the court just moves to a system where the documents that are, and in that case, wouldn't open API access to this documents, external parties, automatically solve this problem. I mean, the moment you bring in this, middle layer of bureaucracy, we are just creating more and more human intervention, increasing the probability of being built into the data set, right? So can we try to minimize that probability?
So that's a nice question, and also ties into what Justice Shakdher said about the two parallel systems of bookkeeping, where you have certain ways that a court keeps and maintains its data, and there is a certain different kind of management system for what it puts up on the eCourts system. So ideally, one would recommend that there just be one integrated system. How we can do it is something that I'd like to hear people's thoughts on. We have Bharti Ali from Haq, I believe, who wants to come in. Bharti?
Thank you, Devendra. I would just like to share, because Justice Shakdher is also aware that our work is largely around child rights issues. And we have been looking at implementation of certain laws in greater depth, particularly the Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act. One of the challenges is with respect to protecting privacy and confidentiality of children vis-a-vis ensuring availability of judicial data pertaining to those cases. If one has to really understand how the law is being implemented. So that's an area that has that requires some attention as to how do we ensure that data is made available and yet children's privacy remains protected. If we could think around those lines, we did try to put together experiences from different countries in the form of a report, which is available on our website. And I can request Urmi, who's part of the discussions today, to share the link to that report, which probably could be looked at by everyone. So that was one concern. The other concern is that often when you start looking at implementation of laws in detail, you realize that the data that you get from the eCourts portal and what you get from the National Crime Records Bureau or any other source doesn't really match up on some things. But whether whether it's about number of FIRs or even if it's about number of disposals or pendency, how do we start looking at bringing some kind of parity in the data that is made available in public domain by different sources? So for instance, on the eCourts portal, we don't get date on which the charge sheet is filed. We don't get date on which the court takes cognizance of the case. So there is a whole list of what we would look at as non-negotiables. And we'll be happy to share that list of non-negotiables as well, if everybody's interested, which we felt that, is very important for a couple of reasons. One is to do away with data that otherwise seems to appear as deceptive data. The second is to, to actually be able to get enough information that can tell us how a case is progressing. The third is to also gather enough information about how the district courts are functioning. And I'll refer to what the Supreme Court recently did in one of the cases where the Supreme Court took suo moto cognizance to look at pendency under the POCSO Act. Data was called from all the POCSO courts, collected by the high courts and shared with the Supreme Court, which actually does not match a lot of other data. Since we've been looking at the eCourts data, it does not match with the eCourts data. And also, when the Supreme Court asked the Ministry of Law and Justice to come out with a scheme to ensure that we have special courts in in all the districts, and where more courts are required, we institute more courts. It was a good exercise, but data can actually help us know where exactly what kind of investment is required. Which district probably needs more than one special court. So I'm looking at the various possibilities of actually using judicial data for improving access to justice. And I just used POCSO as an example. I'm sure the same could be used with other laws. Thank you so much, Devendra, for organizing this and giving us this opportunity. We can definitely take this discussion forward, and would also request Justice Shakdher to give us a little hearing where we could personally probably share more of this data with him. Thank you.
Thanks, Bharti. So I see Som wants to has some points to make. Som, can we hear from you?
Yeah, hi. Can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes,
Yes,
we
you
can
are.
hear.
Okay. So just a couple of points I wanted to make. I think it's important to be quite clear about what we mean by data. It's a very wide thing with a lot of applications. I think it's important to look at it from 2 or 3 different perspectives. One is process reform in the justice delivery itself, where some of the points Justice Shakdher made, capturing data on that would be very, very useful. It will also lead to effective MIS for court managements, and that would seed standardization across courts. Today, the problem is it's not just the lack of standardized norms between 2 high courts. Even within a high court, the approach of one judge and another can vary on a number of issues. So data collection can help with looking at what best process could at least be commended for acceptance across the board. The second part is the legislative impact assessment, where the outcomes and the measurement of the outcomes would be well served by data collection. So I think we need to think about both these facets. And third is to guard against labeling and seeding future AI applications in justice delivery with skewed biases that may creep in. So it's very important to bear in mind that any data collection being done now should be, one should look at it with a lot of circumspection before it gets fed into future artificial intelligence applications in justice delivery. I just wanted to leave this big picture 3 points in for now and then continue later. Thank you.
Thank you, Som. Karan wants to pitch in here. Karan?
Thanks, Devendra, so much. Thank you, Justice Shakdher, for all the informative points and giving us time. I had just 2 thoughts over the course of the discussion. As Justice Shakdher had touched upon, all information entry systems will always have slight errors in them. And though the CIS 3.0, as Surya mentioned, tries to account for this, given the large scope of the judiciary, it's expected that no matter, excuse me, that it will be difficult to perfect data entry processes, or rather to have a system where you have 0 errors. One solution to this, as Justice Shakdher pointed out, could be review systems, and no data management system has generally been successful without counter checks on the entry processes. And so it is just as important as curing the entry processes as it is to have post-entry checks on the system. Now, while I say this, I'm aware of the burdens on the judiciary in light of the workload that they have, and this might need some innovative solutions. But I think it needs to be thought about just as much as other parts of this structure. The other angle to this is there a way that we can think about of courts sharing best practices? So, for example, the NIPFP study shows that the Delhi as in general, not the High Court, including the High Court, has good data entry management systems in the sense of how much data is uploaded. So Delhi actually fares better than most of the country in terms of orders being available and dates being available. Is there a way for what Delhi has done to be learnt by other states. Similarly, recently, the Allahabad High Court's digitization process has been of some fame. And is there a way that other high courts or other courts in the country could learn from the Allahabad High Court in that respect? And these are just examples, but the larger point stands is that if one state or one court system has figured out a part of the system, is there a way for other jurisdictions to learn from that court as well? That's it. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Karan. Justice Shakdher, could I get your views on some of the questions that have come up in chat? So you mentioned that there is a problem with human resource at the courts when it comes to data entry. So either judges are doing the data entry or people who are not familiar with the data are doing the data entry. So where does the solution really lie over here? Is it something that the judiciary can do itself, or can we look at some alternative models? So two ideas that I can see in chat here. One is to crowdsource the validation process, where people can, like us, can go and see whether the data is robust or not. Or the other suggestion we have got is to privatize the process of data entry and management instead of burdening the courts administration with it further. Sir, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, so Devendra, no, I heard comments from some of the participants closely. I think it was Prateek who said perhaps we could use AI. Now, AI perhaps could be part of the solution, but then AI needs to be trained. I mean, the machine needs to be trained. Now, if there are already mistakes, I don't know. Need to ask a technologist whether it'll learn the mistakes or we need to cure the mistakes. So how do we do that? So, you need to have a lot of that metadata available to the machine for it to learn. If it can be done by AI, I would be fine by that because that would cut on cost. But as a short-term measure, I think the courts need to engage perhaps an agency on a contract basis which supervises the data which is fed in. There are issues of sanitization of data, whether courts would or would not sort of take that step. It's a policy decision which the eCommittee has to take. Once eCommittee takes that decision, I think in large measure it will deal with the problem that we have of errors. In the short term, of course, but that depends on the availability of manpower. You could have a kind of a committee which oversees. There are errors, but that would be asking some officers or other personnel in courts to do this particular work as against along with some other work. So that's the challenge. But yeah, I take your point that this needs to be corrected. So that's my response. But I think there is this thinking in the eCommittee that we ultimately need a separate cadre for managing your e-governance in the courts, because at the moment, it's a mix of judges and officers who are internally trained who are doing it. Some of them are doing a fabulous job. But yeah, long term, I think this is a specialization for which we need a separate cadre. That's my short response. Insofar as I just wanted to touch upon what Bharti said as well. Bharti is right to the extent that she makes a point about POCSO, about the she took that as an example, but that is true for every other statute also. A point that she also made was, and something that Karan also said, I think, is about the impact of legislation. Now, while we all speak and talk about this on various forums, but quite frankly, this exercise is not undertaken. You will have to evolve some parameters for judging the impact of legislation. For example, let's take the UAP. How would you need to brainstorm, how would you assess the impact of the legislation? There are, to begin with, the prosecution, the investigating agency, the government, the accused, the defense lawyers, and then this amorphous population which has views on the legislation. Now, how do we assess the impact of the legislation? By the outcomes, i.e., how many prosecutions have we had, or by the number of convictions or acquittals? Because that data comes in much later. I mean, person may be in jail for say 10 years and then he gets acquitted. Now, you can't wait for 10 years to tell you what the impact of the legislation is. So there are challenges, but to get that assessment done, we need to have some short-term measures and some long-term measures. For some legislations, it may be easy. For some, it may not be easy. So it's a good idea, but we need to sort of brainstorm this as to how we can utilize data to assess the impact of legislations. The point that another speaker made about best practices, yes, that's something that is already being implemented, I'm told, by the eCommittee. They have developed a forum where each High Court, feeds data with regard to the measures that they have taken, and other High Courts can pick on that. For example, I don't know how many of you are aware that in Delhi was one of the first places where we introduced virtual courts for challans. These are challans where people plead guilty and they can sort of pay the challan or liquidate the challan at any time of the day by just getting onto the site, paying the demanded fine, and the challan is liquidated, which saves time and effort, because you may have crossed a red light without knowing, or may have been speeding, and there is some challan of some 200 rupees or something. It's not worth your while to go to the court, to the magistrate's court, sit there. It can be done. Now, this was a practice which we started in Delhi, and with the assistance of the eCommittee headed by Justice Chandrachud, it was adopted by other high courts, and we had inaugurations in Madras, Kerala, and lots of other high courts, including Rajasthan. We have started a system of shortly, I think it would be, where even 138 cases where people sort of want to get them compounded, they could be sort of adjudicated upon through virtual courts. So there are some initiatives which are taking place in that direction. And therefore, whichever court adopts a good practice, I think it does get replicated. One of the practices that I also want to point out, which is being there, which is the interoperable criminal justice system. Now, if it pans out all over India, then the difficulties that Bharti pointed out about people not knowing the date of registration of FIR, the date of registration of the charge sheet, the date when cognizance or what is contained. Some of these difficulties will get sorted out. But as I said, if we cure one particular lacuna of having daily proceedings on the system, on the web, on the net, then you will get a profile of what the court is doing. So short term, I think that is something that we need to insist upon and get various chief justices to agree to. Sorry, I took longer than you had anticipated. Back to you, Devendra.
Thank you, sir. I see Bhargavi. Over to you.
Yeah, hi. Thank you. This has been really enlightening. I actually just wanted to share our experience of having worked with the NCLT registry in trying to improve their data entry and data management practices. I know NCLT is not fully integrated into the eCourts system, and maybe therefore this may or may not be directly relevant to the genuine question. But there too, we had a problem with how do we minimize errors in data entry at the NCLT. And what we found is that the easiest way to do it is that if all filings are done electronically, then data entry errors are naturally minimized. But by the time we get to that system and get to that level, it will take time. One easy, if I can just call it a hack, right? One easy hack was that we actually have a standardized form that every litigant who's filing a proceeding has to fill up. That standardized form will have the basic minimum fields of entry that the data entry system should capture. So that was a solution that was acceptable to the registry. It was acceptable to the MCA. I'm not sure if it will be implemented, but it seemed like low-hanging fruit. The challenge will be how do you design this form in an intelligent way such that you capture the basic fields of entry, such as, act name, and, that can only be filled in a standardized manner. So when the data entry operator manually enters this information in the system, if he has a standardized form to work with, it naturally minimizes the errors. That was our take on it. And the second thing I know that the scale of the problem in the, in the civil courts and the criminal courts is entirely different, but this is something that could perhaps be tried on a pilot basis with some of the lower courts, and maybe it will help us. The other quick point I wanted to make is that most data intensive organizations have regular data quality audits that are done by external agencies. I'm not sure why the judiciary cannot engage an external agency to do regular data quality audits such that these audit reports can be published the way every audit report is published. But the fact that an audit will be done may automatically improve data quality, as has already been alluded to of the speakers here.
Thanks, Bhargavi. So we have two people who want to pitch in. I see that Nikhil has a question. So Supriya, if you don't mind, I'll just ask him to pitch in with his questions, and then I'll give you some time to talk. Nikhil.
Hi, Devendra. I hope I'm audible. Am I audible?
Could you speak up a little? Your voice is a little low.
Am I audible, Devendra?
Yes, that's fine. Please go on.
Yes. Good evening to all. Good evening to Sir Justice Shakdher. Sir, I have two questions. I did go through the CIS 3.0 document. It's a fairly extensive document. It does represent a giant leap forward, at least at the moment, in terms of vision, and eventually when it is implemented, I think it will represent a giant move forward. Pursuant to that document, I have two questions. I noticed that there are two chapters in there, particularly one that deals with the e-filing and another that deals with templates. My pertain to these two, given that a substantial number of questions in this discussion appear to be around data integrity and ensuring it, that one being one aspect, and the other being methods to improve the data quality gathering and using that for a purpose of higher level analysis. For instance, I heard words like AI mentioned. I just like to ask two questions, perhaps. one is with regard to meta tagging, and the other is with regard to workflow mapping. My understanding is that, I mean, so I did prior to, I'm a practicing advocate. Prior to practice, I was a software engineer, and I used to work on development of natural language processing related algorithms for processing of internet security data. But one of the lessons we learned very early on in natural language processing, for instance, a lot of which may will have parallels in what we're discussing today in terms of judicial data, was the effective meta tagging. If you have effective meta tags for the data at the point of entry, building on top of that algorithms that are able to deliver high level reports. Some of the reports, in fact, are mentioned in the CIS 3.0 document. To build up to those reports, high level meta tagging at the lowest possible entry level of data is something that perhaps needs to be looked at. That's one. And the other is workflow mapping. Justice Shakdher mentioned that there are vast disparities in workflows with regard to cases and how they are disposed of or handled in different high courts. And given that the CIS 3.0 document contains a national vision with national masters and state masters for data, my question is there an attempt internally within the judiciary to consolidate the various workflows across different types of matters, criminal, civil, NCLT, somebody mentioned, different types of matters across different high courts, to consolidate those workflows and then to optimize them for the purpose of being able to meet this vision, to be able to effectively crunch those numbers and to generate the kind of high level reports that the CIS 3.0 document seems to be mentioning. That's my first question, which is whether workflows, there is any move towards workflow consolidation and uniformity. And the second is whether there is any movement towards or a vision towards meta tagging of basic level entries. So Justice Shakdher, for instance, mentioned that even in the daily orders, if the meta tagging in the daily orders were effectively done, it would generate very high level quality data. So for instance, if there is a bail order passed, then what are the offenses that are alleged? What is the FIR number? What is the which police station? What date the FIR is? Who the accused are? Accused perhaps could be linked with a third-party database like Aadhaar to determine whether there are any priors, criminal antecedents, things like that. There could be a cross spectrum linking, backwards integration of that data. So is there a move towards workflow consolidation and uniformity across high courts in the country? One. And two, is there a vision for meta tagging of daily order level data at the point of lowest entry? These are my two questions. With that, I'll yield.
Thanks, Nikhil. What I'd like to do is, so I'm aware that Justice Shakdher has to, he has a limited amount of time. And Supriya has been waiting to get a chance to speak. Supriya Shankaran from Agami, could you please make your points, and then I'd like to go back to Justice Shakdher to get his responses on these questions.
Sure. Thank you, Devendra, and for hosting this event. I'll be really brief because I think I'm building on some of the points that have come forth before. I'd like to start by saying I think the point, I can't remember who said it before, but around saying how do we look at the entry of data into the system, being machine readable. And I think especially with COVID now, we have a massive opportunity to sort of focus on, I think the leverage with e-filing is immense if we are able to sort of make that itself machine readable. I think it acts as a huge leverage and possibly orders and judgments. So I think if we identify critical entry points of data into the system and see how we can look at making those documents machine readable, it can go a long way in building greater capabilities, which can over time reduce the need for human inputs and errors around this process. So I think that's something that we could actively consider also, given where we are at a point of time in history right now. The second is around, I heard the word standardization because, we're talking about different terms, like the integration either from code to CIS, or if you're talking even about the ICJS, the ability of data between systems to speak to each other. But given we are at a situation where there isn't even a uniform understanding or a classification of what a case is across the country, I think it's paramount that we look at creating standards and specifications for data. And this is fundamentally distinct from standardization, which is to say everyone should have the same case type and the same way of referring to the thing, because we understand the diversity. But having standards and specification to say what should this mean, what should a very clear definition of what each data field should look like, can go a long way in building again the capabilities of the system that can allow for diversity of data in the way it's inputted across system, but still allowing them to sort of speak to each other. And I think that's a huge missing piece in our current system. And a question I have is there a role? Because I thought it was interesting to see Apurv ask the question around the community playing a role, whether the community should kickstart the process of creating the standard and specification, which can later be endorsed, or it can even work top down for the judiciary to create it, and then for that to become the accepted practice on how we understand certain terms. The last is, I think, just to iterate the point of data audits. While audits in terms of manual process is good, at least to our understanding, I'm not sure will even happens. So, where data fields are missing or basic things can be automated, how much of that is done, and whether that is another opportunity we can explore. So, yeah, I think the 3 points of input of data, like particularly e-filing and orders and judgments, the exploration of standards and specifications for data, and automated data checks where possible.
Thanks, Supriya. So just to sort of put all of the things that we've just discussed together so that Justice Shakdher can address them in one go. So there is one thing which has come up consistently, which is that we have a manual system of doing things, and then we are sort of trying to replicate that manual system digitally, and then things are going wrong somewhere, instead of having one integrated system which does both. So there aren't two bookkeeping practices that are taking place. So that is one. What it ties into very cleanly is also what legacy the court has. Like Justice Shakdher said, the presidency courts have their own practices. So there is naturally some inertia to changing something this fundamentally. So how do we work around that? The third, and this is a point that Shilpa Kumar from Umedyar has raised in chat, is that it's great to say that best practices should be adopted by courts, best practices of some courts which are doing well should be adopted by other courts. But given that there is so much disparity, how can we think of this transferring learning on this? And the last, and this was this alludes to some of the points that the questions that Nikhil also raised, and what Supriya said about standards, is how do we think about interconnectivity here? Is it necessary to think of some standard setting body? Is it something that can go completely open source and build at each court level, and the only thing that is necessary that these systems be able to talk to each other? I think that is a fair summary. Justice Shakdher, your views on this?
Yeah, this is a quite a huge wish list presently. In the sense that I think today what the system is basically geared to do is to aggregate data. The point that Nikhil made is there a conversation within the judiciary about consolidation of workflow? The conversation is on, but is it happening? It is not happening at the moment, but if it happens, it would be a wonderful thing, because then we would be kind of using the data for what it is actually worth. Today, it's worth in gold, but the point is we need to realize the value of that gold, which is the data which perhaps needs closer look insofar as the institution is concerned, which also, in a sense, I also accept the point that Nikhil makes about meta tagging. Now, these are aspects that I guess because the overall architecture of this entire e-governance system which operates in India is framed, managed, implemented with the say-so of eCommittee, which has government inputs also in the form of METI and the Department of Justice. So yes, these are points that organizations like you could take to the eCommittee. In fact, since Daksh is involved along with Vidhi and a couple of other individuals in preparing the e-vision document, they could incorporate this and sort of tell them to take up these issues, which also brings me to the other issue which we've been talking about extensively now about audit of data which is uploaded by an external agency. It's a great idea. As I said, it can either be done internally, which is a little bit of a issue in terms of manpower, finding the manpower, right manpower. But yeah, if the e-committee were to permit us, we could have we could sort of subcontract it to an agency which could do this for us. But the trouble is actually, if you take up a big name in the industry which does this kind of work, the trouble is they also further subcontract it, and sometimes the quality of people that you get are not great. But that is something that at an institutional level you can control once you get the green signal. Supriya Sankaran made a good point about AI helping us because because of the fact that we now have e-filing, because most of the courts are doing e-filing, and insofar as Delhi is concerned, the documents which go through our e-filing portal, I would say 90% are machine readable. Most people will tell you that all documents cannot be read by machines because of some inherent limitations. The other problem is that some people do not upload the documents the way they have to be uploaded, and therefore they are not machine readable. But we do not want to enforce it strictly, because that would actually deprive a lot of people, especially in COVID times, about their access to court. So that is something that we are very, very acutely conscious of. But yes, in the long run, this is something that we have to take into account. In fact, I can share this with you. The Supreme Court has formed a subcommittee for digitization, where you have people from, outside agency such as CDAC, who are advising, who are going to advise, rather they're in the process of preparing a document for that purpose as to how digitization has to take place in future, so that the documents which are digitized are machine readable. If we come to that juncture, then maybe most of these errors will get reduced, and we may not have the need and necessity of having very frequent audit interventions. So I guess broadly answers what some of your participants have said. Yeah, Devendra, you can take it.
Thank you, sir. Does anybody else want to mention? Otherwise, there is just one issue that was raised in chat, which I would like to get Justice Shakdher's views on. So, sir, one sort of approach that has been proposed, and there are some of my colleagues from NIPFP have written about it, and there is talk about it generally, is so we are what uh, we have discussed right now in the Daksh report and our paper is staying within the system and trying to make things work better. Like, how do we do whatever we are doing right now better? But the other theme of intervention seems to be that maybe this administration thing is not a set of functions that the court is well suited to perform at all. So, should we be thinking about a systemic change completely where all of this administration, including data management, filing, and everything, is done by a separate agency like the HMCTS in UK or the US administrative courts? Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, Devendra, I'm pretty okay with the idea of an outside expert agency doing it, because that would, in fact, unshackle the judges from doing what um, you know, is not their core competency, and they concentrate on what is their core competency. So I'm quite all right with that. But let me tell you, the plus point of this has been, especially in COVID times, and I can tell you with some amount of experience in the Delhi High Court, that because people were forced to take to technology, the interest in technology has increased. See, a year ago, you and I were not having these sessions through VC. All of us, would come to a seminar hall, hear discussions, and then go back, etc. But now, there is involvement in technology. So my experience in the Delhi High Court was that a lot of judges were very, very averse to technology for several reasons. One of them being, the major reason being a lack of familiarity with technology. So for any system to really succeed, I think you need to make people familiar, and once they become familiar, they also realize the benefits of technology. So while you can take it to while the best outcome would be to take it to an outside agencies for all this management business, I think it would be a good idea to somehow at some level keep the judges involved, because it would help the outside agency also to understand what the client requires. See, at the end of the day, the institution is going to be the client, unless I need not be a technologist, but I know what I want. If I can tell them what I want or what the litigant wants, because the litigant won't perhaps be able to interface directly with them, or in a very broad way if they do some kind of a sample check, etc., feedback. At some level, I think the judges need to be involved, and so that we get what we want out of it. Two, it also keeps the judges interested in what is happening. I don't want them to be like these lovely books on shelves in the library, which in the judges' library, which people don't find time to read. It's only when they have a case that they go for them. So that's what I would want. That's my personal view. I don't know whether others would agree with that. Yeah. Devendra?
Thank you, sir. We have one more question from Nikhil. With all of this technology adoption, is there any discussion of any public ledger tech like blockchains for making the records fully publicly accessible?
No, I think everyone, yeah, this is a good technology to follow, and it has a huge amount of pluses. But have they reached that level? They haven't, but they may at some juncture, and that ought to be the goal at the end of the day. So that's my response to the use of blockchain technology.
Is there anyone I've missed who would like to pitch in? We have Gaurav Godwani with us, right? Gaurav, do you have anything to say from your experience with building big systems that handle judicial data?
So I think most of the points here are already covered, Devendra. I think the asks for us would be if there are ways in which we can involve better with the e-committee in terms of data auditing and in terms of ensuring that there is a standard metadata for some of these case records, that would really help. And also the extent of digitization, if somehow we can well report that to the community, it might also help for us to understand that some of the case records were already coming from a digital background, and other were manually entered. So having those sort of fields in the case records would really help. Those are the only 2 points, apart from the discussion is already has covered most of the points.
Thanks, Gaurav. It's a very interesting point you've made, and it also ties into one larger question which I have been thinking about, but I haven't found a good answer for. Is that we have great ideas for what we want to do in the future, but what happens to the millions of cases which are already in the system and are not up to our standards right now? I'm open to anyone who wants to say something about this. Okay. Does anyone else want to pitch in? Otherwise, we're close to time, and I'll just close the session. So one last chance for someone to pitch in. Okay then. Thank you everyone for participating in this discussion, and thank you so much, Justice Shakdher. This was a fantastic discussion, and I mean, it was absolutely critical that somebody like you, who is one tech savvy and is involved in this data management and with the eCourts, be present for a discussion like this. And I think there were some really interesting points which have come up, and there are things that I can summarize from here, which can act as sort of action points for what we want to do in the future. And I can circulate a short outcome report with everybody. Thank you everyone for joining us, and have a nice evening.
Yeah, thank you, Devendra. Thank you, Surya. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.